What's up, everyone? Blue here at Bluebears Games, and this week we're doing another Blues Budget Battle Brews. This week will be Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. It's a pretty fun deck. It's a combat-based deck, which is a little weird for blue. It has a couple of different ways to win. One of them, obviously, is combat damage because you're making all your creatures unblockable, or at least most of them anyway. There's a secondary win con, which is going to be infect because you're going to be able to make your infect creatures unblockable. And then there's another way that you're going to be able to win with it because of how it's set up to play. But the actual win cons are not in here because they are a little more expensive, and I will show you that in the upgrade section. But for now, let's go over the deck as it stands. Remember, this is my $40 budget decks that I sell at conventions, which by the time this comes out, I will have already done, and this may be gone, or if it did not sell at the convention, I will have available on the Facebook Marketplace during the holiday season. So what does Tetsuko do? So 2 to cast, 1/3, human rogue. Creatures that you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. So it makes all your stuff that's low powered or low toughness but high power unblockable. So let me show you what I've come up with. It's an interesting deck. It's a little different than the norm that I do, but let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit, and I'll show you what I did. I start with the lands always, so it's pretty simple. We're a mono blue deck, so it's not really going to have a whole lot of fun stuff to go over, especially on a budget. So I've got some cyclers in here, like Lonely Sandbar and Desert of the Mindful, some stuff to help you draw cards, which when you see the rest of the deck, you're going to realize it's not really needed, but hey, more draw is more better, right? So it comes into play untapped. You can pay 6 and tap it and sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. And same thing like Memorial to Genius, only the difference is this one comes into play tapped, and it costs 1 less. And I guess that's the advantage to Memorial to Genius compared to Blighted Cataract, is it takes 1 less to use its ability, but it comes into play tapped, so it also taps for a blue as well. Temple of the False God. It's not the greatest land, but it does help ramp a little bit. Rogue's Passage, because not everything in this deck is going to have the ability to keep or stay at a power and or toughness of 1 to stay unblockable with Tetsuko. Plus, sometimes people remove your commander. Now, I know Tetsuko is quite cheap at 2, and the commander tax is going to be easy to deal with, but you want to have another way to do it, so Rogue's Passage is the answer. And every deck I do, I try to put in at least 1 land destruction spell or ability or land or what have you, something to get rid of somebody's land. I'm running out of them, but for now it's Field of Ruin. Evolving Wilds within your deck, like I do with every deck, and then the rest is going to be basic islands. And as I tell everybody every time I do a video, if you want to see the exact number, I'll have it in the description, a deck list linked to my MTG Goldfish account that has the deck. Ramp section is pretty simple. We're in mono blue, and mono blue sucks for ramp. Let's just be honest. I had to go with artifacts or things that could help with that. So I'm going to show you Everflowing Chalice is the first one. It's a 0 to cast with a multi-kicker of 2. It taps to add a mana, 1 colorless mana for each charge counter on it, and the multi-kicker is to put the charge counters on it. We're in Infect and in blue, so I actually threw a couple of things in here for Proliferate, so you can actually get benefit from more than just poison counters. You can get it for Everflowing Chalice, and there's a couple other things in here as well. Renegade Map, so it's a mana fixer, not a mana ramp, but I have no options when it comes to much else, especially on a budget, so it is what it is. Same thing with Traveler's Amulet. You just got to do what you got to do. Explorer Scope, remember, the downside or the drawback to Explorer Scope is that you have to attack with something. In this deck, you're not going to care because most of the things are going to be unblockable, so Explorer Scope it is. Wildfield Scarecrow, so more mana fixing, not really mana ramp so much. It helps thin your deck out of land draws later. And then Burnished Heart, which actually puts them on the battlefield, so technically it's mana ramp, but it's an expensive mana ramp. It's not like 2 or 3 like green has. So those are the options that I've chosen. That's what's really readily available to me on a budget that I could put in the deck, so that's what we get. The meat and potatoes of the deck is the creature section. As you can see, it's pretty thick here. Everything in here is going to have some sort of an unblockable ability or an ability that hits when it attacks or when it deals combat damage, or, you know, it's going to fit the theme very well. I'll start off with Incursion Specialist. 2 for a 1/3 whenever you cast your second spell each turn. Incursion Specialist gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it is unblockable this turn. So one of the things about mono blue is you're going to have some card draw, you're going to have some counter magic, so it should actually hit very well as far as the second spell a turn. Elusive Spell Fist, another 2 to cast for a 1/3, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked. So again, more stuff to help because sometimes stuff happens and Tetsuko may be removed from the board, and you still need to be able to get combat damage in, so a couple of the creatures are going to be akin to this one right here. Sky Theater Strix, now remember, power and toughness has to be power and or toughness, or actually it's actually or, has to be a 1, and this one's a 1. It has a little evasion itself in the flying, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So the way that works with Tetsuko is simple. You attack, it's unblockable, then you cast spells and it buffs, and that's how you get that damage through without being blocked. Flying doesn't hurt it either, because that's evasion itself, and not everybody has flyers, but we're playing Commander, so you're most likely going to see it. Hypnotic Sprite, it has an adventure attached to it, which says that it can counter a spell with a converted mana cost 3 or less, so that helps fit the theme of counter magic, so this is a little bit of a control deck as well. And then itself is a 2/1 flyer, so the 1 toughness lets it be unblockable. Flying is evasion itself, but, at least if your opponent has other flyer, or at least defending flyers, you can get through anyway. Azure Mage, 2 to cast for a 2/1, so it itself can be unblockable as well, but the reason it's in here is for the ability to draw a card. Arcane Investigator, again, another 2 to cast 2/1. Whenever you feel like paying 5 into a blue, you roll a die, a d20 specifically, and on a 1 to 9, you can draw a card, and on a 10 to 20, you can instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So again, it's unblockable. The ability doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be tapped. It's a colon, which means it can be done as many times as you have the mana to do so, and it doesn't matter if it's tapped or not because there's no tap symbol on it. Skyship Plunder, so a 2/1 flyer for 2. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, for each kind of counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another of that kind. And remember, there are some things in here that have infects, so you're going to be given poison counters, and that's where this guy starts to really shine. He's also unblockable when Tetsuko is out because he has a 1 toughness. Thrumming Bird, 2 to cast for a 1/1, and it's a flyer. Dealing the combat damage allows you to proliferate. It's kind of compounding on that whole helping the infect part if you need to go that route, okay? Eternal of the Harsh Truth. So this one's a 3 to cast 1/3 with an ability called Afflict, and it's got Afflict 2, and what that means is whenever this creature becomes blocked, defending player loses 2 life. Now, it's not going to get blocked often, especially since it has a 1 power, and with Tetsuko out, it should be unblockable, but you never know. And then whenever it deals, whenever it attacks and is not blocked, draw a card. Now, there's the other part of the theme to this deck. This is the first of many that when it does something, you draw a card, and the secondary thing that you can win with, or at least the third thing you can win with, I'll explain in the upgrade section later, but just keep in mind there's going to be a lot of this. Marques's Infiltrator, so it's a 3 to cast 1/1 with the Throne, and what that means is whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. There's that thing again where you do something, you draw a card. Tandem Lookout, 3 to cast 2/1 with Soul Bond, so when it comes into play or another creature comes into play, you can pair it with another creature, and as long as they're paired together, that creature plus Tandem Lookout has, whenever this creature deals damage, not combat, but just damage, to an opponent, draw a card. Library Larcenist, this is a 3 to cast 1/2, and whenever it attacks, it doesn't have to deal combat damage, just attack. You draw a card, and with Tetsuko out, and it's 1 power specifically, it's unblockable, so you'll still get damage through as well. Scroll Thief, another one, 3 to cast 1/3. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Gateway Sneak, another 3 to cast 1/3. When it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. But this one has something where if you have a gate in play, you're not gonna. There's no gate. It's a monocolored deck, so don't worry about that. Jesse and Thief, same thing. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, but it has prowess, so it can get buffed afterwards when you cast spells. After it's declared as an attacker and it can't be blocked. Norok Commander, so it's a 3 to cast 2/1 Shroud. You cannot target it, neither can your opponents. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. See a theme here. Sarkar Spellblade, 3 to cast 2/1. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put a charge counter on it. And when you do, the abilities of the counters are whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw X cards or X number of charge counters on it. Again, more of the same theme. Benthic Infiltrator, 3 to cast 1/4 with the Void, so it doesn't have color. Doesn't really matter in this deck, but it's part of the abilities. It has Ingest, so whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top card of his or her library, or in the new wording, their library, and it is unblockable itself. Merfolk Wayfinder. Now this one, it's unblockable with Tetsuko out because it has a 1 power. This is actually in here because this is a mono blue deck, not because of it. It just happens to fit in that theme. It's 3 to cast, with flying, power and toughness 1/2, but when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 3 cards of your library, and then you can put all island cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library. It's to help get you more lands in your hand. Flux Channeler, so it's a 3 to cast 2/2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Again, forwarding that theme. Graceful Adept, 3 to cast 1/3. It says you have no maximum hand size. Trust me, there are going to be at least one more of these cards in here that takes away your hand size limitation, and in the upgrade section, I'm going to tell you a whole lot more. Ninja, the Deep Hours, so 4 to cast for a 2/2. It has Ninjutsu, so you can return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand and put this card onto the battlefield. Tapped and attacking, that's what Ninjutsu does. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card.
Because it helps the deck achieve one of its main
Familiar
goals,
theme?
which is to go wide.
Sure-footed Infiltrator, it's a 4 to cast 2/3. You can tap another untapped rogue you control, and it can't be blocked this turn, and there are a bunch of rogues in here. Not all the creatures are rogues, but there's plenty. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Thieving Magpie, same thing. Whenever it does combat damage to an opponent, draw a card. It's 4 to cast 1/3 flyer. Luzun, Scholar General, so 4 to cast 1/3 with Horsemanship, and when it deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. And one of the things you can do additionally with some of the ones that are here that don't say combat damage and just say damage, you can add a pinger equipment in here, or enchantment, an aura, if you will, that will allow it to just ping opponents and make you draw cards. And horsemanship, I know I passed over it. It's not very common in Magic. It was done in one set and then reprinted a couple of times in different sets. It just means that it can't be blocked except for by creatures with horsemanship. It's the same thing as Shadow. People put a lot of emphasis on this horsemanship. It's no different than Shadow was. I don't see what the big deal is. So, Deep Fathom Skulker. It's a 6-cast 4/4, again with the Void. Doesn't really matter. Whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, you may draw a card. Combat damage, sorry, on this one, it's combat damage. It's any creature you control whenever they do. So the ones that have it themselves, they would be able to draw 2 with him out. Or you would be able to draw 2. The second part of the theme here is Infect, as I've been talking about with the Proliferate. Plague Mirror is the first one in here. It has Infect, and it's actually a small, I guess, mana rock, but on a stick. Ichor Claw Mirror, so it's, again, another 2-cast 1/1 with Infect. However, if it does happen to become blocked, it gets +2/+2 until the turn. Phyrexian Digester, 2/1 Infector, and Blighted Angel, a 2-cast 1/1 that can't be blocked with Infect. So those are the creatures. They're actually pretty, how do I put this, synergistic with this commander. They all do something that needs to be done, and there's a lot of card drawing here. Blue loves to draw cards. That's its main thing it wants to do, so I figure why not do it. So I've got a couple of spells here we're going to go over next. The first section is going to be like card draw stuff, then we're going to go into some counter magic, then we're going to go into some defensive stuff other than counter magic. So let's just keep moving along. We start with Contentious Plan, 2-cast to draw a card and proliferate, fording that theme where the counters matter for Infect, they matter for, say, what is this thing called? I forget what this is called. The Everlasting, whatever it's called, because Everflowing Chalice. You know, Proliferate helps that with the counters that it has on there, so you can make it a really big mana rock. Anticipate, pretty simple. Look at the top 3 cards, put one in your hand, the other is on the bottom of your library and in the order of one mind. So I chose this because there are non-humans and humans in this deck, so it costs 2 less to cast if you control one of each, and you get to draw 2 cards. So it can potentially be a 1-cast sorcery that lets you draw 2 cards. Not quite Ancestral Recall, but it's getting there. Divination, so there's no benefit on top of other than just being 3-cast for a draw 2. And Steady Progress, yet another proliferate and draw a card. This one costs 3 though. So those are the couple that I chose for draw spells. The rest of the spells that are instants and sorceries, mostly instants, will be counter magic. And I've got a small little suite here of counter magic that should help, especially on a budget. We're not talking mana drains or anything like that, which I'll suggest probably in the upgrade section. But these are some cheap to cast. I tried to keep the mana cost down to under 3 if possible. No, I've found out that this is actually really powerful in Commander because it's a 1-cast counter magic that can hit an artifact or an enchantment. Essence Scatter hits a creature. Second Guess hits the second spell cast in the turn. Actually works really well in Commander. Disdainful Stroke, counter a spell that's converted mana cost 4 or greater, and there's a lot of spells out there that are 4 or greater played in Commander. Arcane Denial, counters a spell, lets you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, lets the person whose spell you countered draw 2. Negate hits a non-creature spell. Horribly Awry actually is pretty good. So it's 2 to cast, counter a creature spell with converted mana cost of 4 or less, and if it's countered this way, you can remove it from the game or exile it. Keep Safe, counter a spell that targets a permanent you control. This is kind of one of those things where it's meant to help protect your commander when it doesn't have, say, hexproof or anything on it, and then you get to draw a card. And then Cancel, quintessentially the replacement for Counterspell. And Counterspell is still expensive as far as monetary value goes, and I have to keep these decks under a certain price, so unfortunately I can't just throw Counterspells, at every deck, so Cancel is the next best option I have. So those are the counter magic spells I've chosen for this build. Next we're going to go with some utility, and in this utility section we're going to have a lot of controlling of your opponent's creatures. So we'll start with auras that literally make your opponent's commanders useless. Witness Protection, it makes a 1/1 green and white citizen creature with power and toughness 1/1, and it loses all abilities, and the rest of the ones that you're going to see are going to be akin to that. So Frogify makes it a frog that's 1/1 and loses all abilities. Kasmina's Transmutation, same thing, but doesn't turn into a frog. I don't know I think it just keeps its abilities, or its types. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and becomes a 1/1 whatever it was. Ichthyomorphosis, it's an 0/1 blue fish with no abilities. Raven form doesn't stay on it and doesn't, keep it locked down, but at least it exiles an artifact or a creature. And the downfall is your opponent, or the controller, not your opponent, because you might do it to yourself, creates a 1/1 blue creature token with flying. It can be foretold as well for 1 blue. Aetherize returns all attacking creatures to their owner's hands. And then Aether Spouts. So 5 to cast instant for each attacking creature, its owner puts it on the top or the bottom of their library. And your choice here comes down to how much you want the things to go away. Do you want them to go to the bottom of the library so they don't get to them? Is your opponent playing something that's very search heavy, like with Demonic Tutors, Vampire Tutors, and stuff like that? You put it on top because you know they're going to play it and shuffle them in anyway. There's a lot of choices made in the middle of the game. So, and the last section is just going to be utility stuff. This is all stuff that helps the deck make it work a little bit better. We got Notorious Throng. So it is a 4 to cast tribal rogue sorcery. You can cast it for Prowl, 1 blue and 5, and what that means is that you may cast it for its Prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player with a rogue. Keep that in mind, there are a bunch of rogues in here. You may want to try to cast it for its Prowl cost. And why is it more expensive? Well, it creates X1/1 blue fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, so they'll be unblockable because of Tetsuko. Where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn, and then if this spell's Prowl cost was paid, take an extra turn after this one. It's an extra turn spell that doesn't exile itself. That's why this is good in here. Stolen Identity. So it's a 6-cast sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature. Doesn't matter who controls it. It could be your opponent's commander. You can make a token of it. The reason why this is in here is because of the cipher. So when you cipher something onto a creature, it gains the ability that I'll explain it with reading off the thing. After you've cast the original spell from your hand, you may then exile this spell, encode it on a creature you control, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So you can cast this for free. If you encode it on one of your unblockable 1/1s that just keeps hitting, you can cast this spell for free if it's encoded on it every time. So say you encode it on some stupid 1/1 in there that gets through every turn, and your opponent has a pretty cool commander. Maybe Sakashima, that's it, who doesn't care that things are legendary. You create one of them, and then you create a whole bunch of other stuff that, matches it, like more Saskashimas, multiple, what are they, multiple Perforoses. Your opponent's playing Perforos because Saskashima is on the board, and it doesn't matter about the legendary rule. Lots of things you can do with that, so. Spellbook, no maximum hand size, because there's a lot of card draw in this deck. You're not going to want to drop them. You want to keep them in your hand. Ring of Evo Style, so I like to put something in every deck that's a budget deck that helps protect the commander. This is my hexproof giving equipment. Normally I do something like Mask of Avacyn or Whisper Silk Cloak, something like that. But we're in mono blue, so Ring of Evo Style makes sense. The equipped creature gains hexproof until the turn if you pay 2 of any. So it kind of gives hexproof, or the ability to gain hexproof. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on a quick creature if it is a blue creature. So you can make some things grow. There are some unblockables in here, like specifically Blighted Agent, who you can keep around by giving it hexproof, and every turn making it bigger and bigger, so you can swing in for 10 poison counters in one shot if you need to. Fire Shrieker gives a creature double strike. I mean, more damage is more gooder, right? Kefnet's Monument, so 3 to cast, it's one of the legendary monuments of the 5 cycle. This one makes this a blue creature spell as you cast, cost 1 less, always good. It's not really ramp per se, it's kind of cost reduction. I was originally going to put it in the ramp section, but I decided against that. And then the second ability doesn't really matter, but I mean, whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature an opponent controls doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. If it's not tapped, it doesn't tap it. That's the only thing I have wrong with it. That's the only thing I'm finding wrong with that. And the last card in the deck is Reconnaissance Mission. So what's better than drawing cards? More drawing cards. 4 to cast enchantment, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, and you can cycle this if you want, if you don't need all that card draw, and get rid of it and draw a card. So that's the deck in a nutshell. It's actually pretty good. I recommend more of the intermediate player probably on this one, but I guess a beginner could probably use it to its fullest. Learning how to play counter magic takes a little bit more skill than just, turning dudes sideways and attacking, but, some people learn differently. Anyway, that's the deck, and again, it's available at the convention that probably just passed by the time this comes out, and if it doesn't sell, I'll have it available for the Holiday Rush, and if it does sell, I'll be making another copy of it anyway, so either way, it'll be available. Let's go over some upgrades for this real quick.
So as far as upgrades go, I start with the lands like I always do. The most important thing here is like a Reliquary Tower. So all the cards in this deck are designed to help you draw cards when you attack with them or when you deal combat damage, so having Reliquary Tower actually is a huge benefit. Your hand size should be rather large. Next up is Castle Vantress, and the reason for that is because if you are going to draw that many cards, you want to try to scry as much as you can so that you can get better draws as you go. Access Tunnel. So Tetsuko will probably be targeted a lot, so Access Tunnel will help you get more unblockable ability, so that's a good way to go. Karn's Bastion, if you're going to lean heavily into some Infect, Karn's Bastion will help a lot. And then, of course, Nykthos, Shrine to the Nyx, because you're monocolor and you should have a bunch of blue stuff out, so you should have Devotion, so it should help you ramp a little bit. And lastly on the lands, we're going to go with Inkmoth Nexus. That is just in case you want to do a more Infect-heavy thing, just like the Karn's Bastion. They go well together, so that's why I'm going to suggest that. Up next, we're going to talk about Ramp. We're in mono blue, so Ramp isn't really all that great, so you're going to be relying on mana rocks. So obviously, Soul Ring is a good addition. I don't include them because I don't have enough for each deck I make. Thought Vessel, just like the Reliquary Tower, very important because it'll make it so you have no maximum hand size, and with the amount of stuff you're drawing, or amount of ways you can draw in this deck, it would be nice. Same thing with the Canter of Endless Water, so it's a 3-cast version of a Thought Vessel, so it helps, and I think that actually can add a color. Then you got 2 converted mana cost rocks. One of the ones I'll mention is Felwar Stone. Most likely your opponents are going to be playing blue because it's one of the most popular colors in Commander, so why not? Nyx Lotus will help because you're in mono color and your devotion should be high, so it should ramp you very nicely. And lastly, we've got Mana Crypt. It's expensive for a reason. It's actually pretty quick. It helps you ramp just as nicely as some of the lands out there, so why not as well? Next, we'll talk about the dudes, and when I say dudes, I always mean creatures. One of the interesting additions you can do here is Charge the Raging Isle. It has no power, but when you use its ability after you've attacked and it's unblocked, you can actually buff it up a couple times to make it really heavy, or really high on the power. Master of Waves is an addition you can make here. It helps create a lot of tokens that are going to have at least a power of 1 or 2, which fits into Tetsuko's theme. Dear Kraken will also help create tokens, so you can create these 1/1s that will be unblockable. Psychosis Crawler is a great addition here as well. You're going to be drawing a lot of cards, so why not use that to deal damage to each opponent? So it's a great addition there. Min Wily Illusionist, it's the same thing as the Master of Waves because it creates tokens, and a lot of them, and because they're only going to have 1 power if you have a lot of them, or 1 defense or 1 toughness, it'll still work with Tetsuko. And then lastly, you're going to have a win con that I'm going to suggest here is Triska Decaphile. So you have to have 13 cards in hand, and that shouldn't be a problem in this deck. You should be able to draw a bunch of cards based on the combat effects that are on your creatures, and you should be able to get to 13 very easily. So good suggestions there. Next up, some spell upgrades we're going to go over. Counter Magic, especially the free Counter Magic. Counterspell itself is a good one, but the free Counter Magic that's available, like Force of Will and Force of Negation, all that would be a great addition here. The blue has a surprisingly good amount of creature removal, single-targeted, like Pongify. And while it does have the disadvantage of giving your opponent a token, it shouldn't really matter all that much. It's still great to get rid of your opponent's commanders, and then they get a generic 3/3 or a 1/1 flyer, whatever have you. Blue's ability to remove things after that isn't that great, so we're going to go with a Cyclonic Rift and things like that. There's an Aether Sprout's already in the deck, so Cyclonic Rift will help. You can do either or both and help remove stuff from the board. Sure, it can be cast again, but it's what blue has. Card draw on blue is actually the best. This deck already has a huge amount of card draw in it. However, adding some spells that will help you later might not be bad, so things like Brainstorm. There's also tutors that you can use. Blue has the ability to go get things like artifacts or instants and sorceries, like Solve the Equation will help you here. Mystical Tutor could be an addition as well. And then lastly on the spells, I'm going to suggest something that's a little different. So we're not in a extra turns taking style of deck. However, Alron's Epiphany actually helps this deck because it creates the 2 1/1 flyers that can be unblockable as well. So it's not a bad addition here. Some enchantment upgrades that you can do here. So some redundancy is a good thing. Coastal Piracy will go well with the other enchantment in here that helps you draw a card whenever a creature deals combat damage. Feywild Visitor is actually not a bad one. I'll have it up here so you can take a look at that one. It's pretty good for this deck. Propaganda will help it so that when you're attacking, because that's what this is based on, this whole deck, the ability to attack back is hindered even a little bit. So it's not great, but it's still a little bit of resistance to being attacked back. Ominous Seas, you're drawing so many cards that Ominous Seas may actually be a factor here. You'll actually get the 8/8 tokens. Sure, they won't be unblockable, but they're good blockers. So, not bad. Wizard's Class, another redundant thing here for not having a maximum hand size is always good. It helps you draw some cards, keeps your hand size where it doesn't really matter, and redundancy so that you have multiple ways of having a no maximum hand size card on the table. Imprisoned in the Moon, it's a nice little prison enchantment. White and blue both have them. Imprisoned in the Moon is one of the better ones you can choose here. Inexorable Tide is, again, another proliferate thing where if you're trying to go with the Infect route, it's very minimal in this deck, but it could be a possible thing, so Inexorable Tide will help with that. Psychic Corrosion, you're drawing a lot of cards, so maybe another win con could be milling your opponent out, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do that by drawing cards, and then your opponent mills cards. And then the last thing I'll suggest is actually akin to like a mono red deck using Blood Moon, which is back to basics. It kind of keeps it so that your opponent, if they're not in a mono color, since we're using a lot of basics, it'll be a good addition to a deck like this so that you can help lock down your opponents a little bit. And a couple of artifact upgrades we'll do next. So the first one I'll mention is actually the most important here is Strixhaven's Stadium. It's a win con. Yes, it's also a mana rock, but it's specifically a win con in this deck because of all the attacking and combat you're going to be able to get through. It could actually be a win con here. Sapphire Medallion will help reduce the cost of all your blue spells. Always good, and I actually always will suggest this a medallion in a monocolored deck. Throne of the God Pharaoh will help you get extra damage through. You're already attacking, and most of the time your creatures will be tapped for the most part, so why not get some extra damage in? Meekstone is a good addition here too. Meekstone will actually help lock down your opponent's creatures a little bit, some of the bigger ones anyway, not the smaller ones. So if you're facing against another token deck or something that's a little white weenie-ish, it won't help as much, but against a lot of the big dragons that are coming out with our dragon, it will help. So good options there. What else we got here? Contagion Engine, again, proliferating, so following that theme of Infect if you want to go that route. And then there's a lot of equipment that you can look at. I'm going to suggest Umezawa's Jit because it does a lot of things that you would like to do. It helps keep you alive with life gain. It can help buff creatures. It can also help make your other opponent's creatures smaller. So good option there. Now move on to the Planeswalkers, and the Planeswalkers are actually quite small. There's two here that I'm going to suggest. Narset, Part of Veils, is great in almost any blue deck because it helps prevent your opponent from drawing extra cards. And then in this deck, Tamiyo the Moonsage, and I understand that I have a bias because this specific Tamiyo is my favorite Planeswalker in the game. But in this deck, it actually helps because it has the redundancy factor on its ultimate to make it so that you don't have a maximum hand size, which is great in a deck that draws so many cards. So the other two abilities are okay. You're just trying to get to that ultimate. All right. And lastly, we're going to talk about some win cons here. So this is going to sound redundant on a lot of things because this is Blue's main way to win, but Labman, Jace Weirder of Mysteries, and Thorkel or Thassa's Oracle are great options for this deck because you're drawing so many cards. You may even draw yourself out, and that could be a win con in itself. So there are 3 things you can look at. You don't have to put them all in there, but they're good to have all 3 for redundancy. So a couple of different win cons that you can go with that will actually help you win the deck as a surprise. And that's what I got for you this week. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or anything you want to talk about, I have my contact information up here. It's bluebearsgames.online for Facebook if you want to message me there. You can email me at bluebearsgames@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment in the section below, and I'll get back to you any way you want. On top of that, I have a couple ways that I'm going to ask for support going forward. This is the first one. So I've decided that I'm going to actually put my information up there if somebody wants to do some donations, maybe $1, whatever have you. I don't care what the denomination is. Friends and family on PayPal, it's paypal.me/BlueBearsGames. I have a Venmo, it's at BlueBearsGames as well. And then I also have Cash App, which is $BlueBearsGames. Any support is definitely appreciated if you wanted to go that route and show your support and love for the channel. But if that isn't your bag, there's a couple other ways you can do it. I do sell all the decks that are featured on my channel. Some of them were pre-sold before I even made the video, but this deck specifically is one that will be for sale on my Facebook page and on the Facebook Marketplace. There's a bunch of decks up there that you can look at, and all the prices there, and if you want any of them, you can just go ahead and use the contact information I've given previously to go ahead and let me know what you were interested in. Additionally, there's a couple other ways that you can support me. So if you don't want to just donate money, which is always a good thing, and if you don't want to buy any decks, the support can come for free, which is you can go ahead and do me the favor of subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. That helps me, so if I get to my 1,000, I can get monetized on YouTube. Like the video because apparently the analytics show that if you have more liked videos, the more your stuff gets shared out into the community. And then speaking of sharing, share it out to somebody who may be interested in a deck like this, or somebody who you think might be interested in following me on this channel. Other than that, that is my time for the week. I want to thank you for being here, and I will see you all next week.